Hello, Dr. Mashburn. And so we're continuing our lecture on the immune system. And this should finish up what we need to talk about when we talk about the immune system. And so in the first talk, we talked about the two different types of the immune system, and we focused on the innate defenses, the skin, and then internal defenses. So now we're going to focus on the adaptive. All right, so remember, adaptives are specific. The innate are non-specific. And so when we talk about adaptive defenses, we're talking about humoral immunity, which is how we make antibodies, and then cellular immunity, which are kind of like killer cells, cells that go out and are cytotoxic. They can go out and kill things. Okay, and so let's focus on what it means to be an adaptive defense. And so these adaptive defenses, these are going to protect us against infectious agents, pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and abnormal body cells. So these would be things that if you had a bad blood cell transfusion, remember red blood cells have antigens on them, so this is what would happen if you had a bad transfusion reaction. You would get one of these adaptive defense mechanisms would be turned on. And it amplifies an inflammatory response. So remember, inflammation is local. And so maybe that something's entered into your bloodstream and you're into your body, and you've tried to attack it locally, but now it's gotten into your bloodstream and spreading widespread. And so this is a way to enhance that and then to attack whatever may be systemic in your body. When we talk about the adaptive immune response, it's specific. Okay, so it's one antigen is going to cause this to turn on, one specific antigen, and we'll talk about how that works. It's systemic. Your entire body is involved with this, and it has memory. And this is important when we talk about vaccines. And if you haven't had microbiology yet, and if you need microbiology, some of the majors don't, but if you're in nursing and you're going to take microbiology, you'll go into this a whole lot more detail. This is just, again, kind of just a brief overview of how the immune system works. But it works with two overlapping arms. So this adaptive system has the humoral or antibody and the cellular or cell-mediated immunity. So you have, remember, innate, adaptive, and then adaptive has two arms. Okay? Make sure you're keeping all that straight. So remember, an antigen, we've said this before, just a reminder, what is it? It's a substance that mobilizes an adaptive response. Okay? And it can be usually large. It's a large complex molecule that's not normally found in the body. So we classify that as non-self. So I know you've learned about blood, and we talked about how red blood cells have those antigens on them that another person would recognize as foreign. All right, so the two different types of cells. You have T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes. Okay, so you have lymphocytes, just number one, you have lymphocytes. So remember, those are a type of white blood cell that's made in the bone marrow. Okay, so if you remember, you have those progenitor cells, and then you have those divisions, and you get your myeloid line, your lymphoid line, and so you're going to get your formation of lymphocytes. Now, the B lymphocytes, we call those B cells. They're for humoral immunity. They make antibodies, and they mature in the bone marrow. So B, that's why they're called B cells, bone marrow. The T lymphocytes, or T cells, that's cell-mediated. I call those killer cells. They secrete toxic enzymes that can kill other pathogenic cells. And they mature in the thymus, so T cells for thymus. Okay. You also have some things called antigen-presenting cells. They don't necessarily respond to specific antigens, but they do recognize and mark and then present these antigens to your immune system. Okay. You'll learn more about that. I don't do a whole lot of that now. You'll learn more about that in micro. All right, so again, we're in adaptive defenses, and we're talking about humoral immunity. Okay, and so we're going to talk about the first time you've been exposed to an antigen, the primary response, very first time. So let's just say this antigen is, we're just going to say it's a bacteria. So the very first time, and we're going to say maybe it's, we'll just make one up, Smoothlecoccus, dogcephalus. We'll just make one up, not even a real one. All right. Well, those bacteria, just like red blood cells, they have markers on them. Okay, which is an antigen. All right. And so in your system, you have these B cells that are kind of these B lymphocytes, all right, that have these antigen binding receptors on them. So if you remember back to red blood cells, how the antigen has a shape, and then the antibodies have the complement shape so that they can find each other. And so you see this one's got a shape that's different, this one's got a shape that's different, and here's the match. All right, so the antigen and the B cell bind. Well, that turns on and activates that B cell. And so the B cell will then undergo division and make a clone. And so now you've got two identical cells with those matching little antigen binding receptor proteins on them. And then those are going to go on and divide. And what you come up with and the results are what are called plasma cells. Okay? And plasma cells make antibodies. And antibodies are freely flowing in your blood, and they can go out and attach and find these antigens and mark them for destruction. You also make a memory cell, okay? So you don't want to get rid of, you want to be prepared in case you are exposed to this antigen again. So you don't want to get rid of that cell that can recognize and bind that antigen, so you make a memory cell that is primed to respond if you ever get exposed to it again. And so remember, these antibodies, they're going to be out in your blood, and so if the antigen is still in your blood, they're going to go out and get those and take them out of circulation. Kind of like how RhoGAM did. If you remember from blood lecture, we talked about RhoGAM, and you give a pregnant woman, Rh negative woman, RhoGAM, and the antibodies kind of go out and grab up those Rh antigens and get rid of them. So that's kind of what the antibodies, that's what they're going to be doing. They're secreted to get rid of the antigen. So that's the first response. Now, let's say years later, okay, so that Staphylococcus, whatever it was, that was maybe at your grandmother's house, and maybe you don't go back to her house for years and years and years. For some reason, you've gone for you've gone 10, 15 years. Now you've gone back for whatever reason, and so you've been exposed to this same bacteria again. It's only found at this one place. So now here's your secondary response. Well, remember, you had that B cell, that memory B cell out there, and now here those antigens are again, and it recognizes it. Well, this memory cell makes a really rapid response. It's primed to go really, really fast. And so you get just a ton of these clones made, okay? And so these plasma cells, you make, not clones, but plasma cells, make a lot of these plasma cells, and they are able to dump out just a tremendous amount of antibodies, and so you can rapidly attack and get rid of the antigen. You also make more memory cells. So if you were to be exposed a third time, it would be an even more rapid response, okay? And so this is what happens when you give someone a vaccine. So what you do when you give someone a vaccine is you present the antigen. So if you're going to get maybe a measles vaccine, then the thing that causes the immune response, the antigen on measles, is given to you. So sometimes it's an attenuated or the actual virus or the actual bacteria that's been killed, depending on if it's a viral vaccine or a bacterial vaccine. So they either kill it or attenuate it so won't actually make you sick, but the antigen, the little marker, is still on there. And so then your body will respond to it. It'll bind it. It'll make those clones, make those plasma cells, and make those memory cells. Then they'll give you another one, a booster, expose you to it again. So now you get more plasma cells and more memory cells. So that's what the booster does. It gives you more memory cells so that if you ever are actually exposed to the actual antigen, the real measles, then it will attack and get rid of the measles very quickly. These B cells, these things that you're kind of born with, they come in all these little antigen binding receptors, they come in just a myriad form of shapes and sizes. These little Y's that we kind of use to stand for those, they have all kind of different shapes, and just by nature, they're randomly designed so that something will probably bind to it at some point. Now, some of your B cells may never ever be activated. They may never be activated because they've never been exposed to that antigen. But chances are you've got a B cell that, regardless of what you're exposed to, it will respond to it. Okay, just how these are randomly designed. And again, you can read in your book about that, and you'll learn more about that in micro. All right. So when we talk about humoral immunity, I always laugh when I did this lecture because I took an entire semester of immunology. and I have to do this basically in a 45-minute lecture. So it's taking an entire semester of knowledge and trying to compress it into about 30 to 45 minutes of immunology for you guys. So humoral immunity, again, comes as in two forms, active and passive, okay? And so when we say it's active, we're saying your body is actively making those antibodies, okay? So you're being exposed to a pathogen, all right? And your body is naturally forming those antibodies. So it's going through this process that I just demonstrated, okay? So you can have naturally acquired active humoral immunity, that's a mouthful, which means you've been naturally exposed to the infection or pathogen. So for example, I had the chickenpox as a child, okay? So I had the chickenpox. That was my antigen, and then I mounted the immune response. I have these memory cells, and so now if I'm around someone with chickenpox, I'm not going to get it. I've got plenty of antibodies and memory cells that can be activated to mount a response and not get chickenpox. All right, that's naturally acquired. Artificially acquired means usually you've been given a vaccine, so you've been given a dead or attenuated version of that pathogen. So my daughter, she had the chickenpox vaccine. So instead of her being exposed to the actual chickenpox, you know, and mounting her own set of antibodies, she was given the antigen as a shot, and then her body was able to go through that process, okay? So it's just two different ways of being presented the antigen for the first time, either naturally exposed to in the world or artificially us giving it to you as a vaccine, all right? So either way, you actively form your own memory cells and plasma cells. Now, the passive way means you're being given the antibodies. You're not mounting an immune response. You're not making memory cells. You're not making plasma cells. You're not making antibodies. So you're not doing any of this. You're getting an infusion of the antibodies directly without going through all of those steps. You're just getting the antibodies. So one way to do that naturally is breastfeeding. So when a mother is producing milk, her antibodies are naturally going to go into that milk and go to the fetus. And you also can pass, or to the infant, and you can also pass those antibodies through the placenta to the fetus. So antibodies passing from the mother to the child, either in the womb through the fetus or through the milk to the infant, is naturally acquired passive immunity. You're getting the antibodies. And that's why it's one of the reasons it's really great to breastfeed if you can, because your child, it's like giving the very first vaccine. They haven't had a chance to mount that immune response. They haven't been able to go through this whole process yet. So you're giving them a booster and just giving them the antibodies right off the bat to help protect them until their own system starts to produce all of these antibodies themselves. Then you can have what's called artificially acquired. And this is when you get bit by a snake or a tiger, a spider, and they give you the antivenin or the immune serum. So you've been bitten by a snake, and so here's the snake antigen, and we need to get rid of that. So they infuse those antibodies straight into your system, and those antibodies will go and grab that snake venom and get rid of it. So that's what's called antivenin. So that will be artificially acquired. So you're going to see some questions on the exam. You'll be given a scenario, and you have to tell me, is that humoral immunity? Is it active? Is it passive? Is it naturally acquired or artificially acquired? Okay? All right, so these antibodies that we keep talking about, what are they actually? They're big proteins, so they're large proteins, okay, that are secreted by plasma cells, and we call them immunoglobulins. Okay, that's a big word, immunoglobulins. And they're called gamma globulins. And again, if you take micro, you're going to get a whole lot of this. I'm just giving you the Cliff Notes version of this right now. And these antibodies can bind with specific antigens, okay, that are detected by the B cells. So think of them as tags. You're just tagging things. You're tagging foreign antigens so that other parts of the immune system can then come in and destroy it. So that's what it is. They're just a way to tag those antigens. And they look like this. They're usually, that's why I keep drawing them as a Y, is this is what they look like. Okay, so they have this kind of Y-shaped structure. And this antigen binding site, this is where we have lots of variability. So those B cells that have those antigen binding proteins and antibodies, this is where you get a lot of variability, and it can bind to just about any antigen out there. Again, you'll get more information. You can read your book, or you can go take microbiology. But that's all you need to know right now. Okay, so we covered the B cells. So let's talk about the T cells, which are called also cytotoxic cells. And they're going to target cells, especially, really, a lot of times you'll see T cells target cells that have been infected. So like a cell that's got a bunch of virus in it, or cells that have been infected with bacteria or parasites, cancer cells, or even foreign cells, like those red blood cells in a transfusion. And so these are cells that target other cells that have been infected. And so what they do is they produce a lethal hit. So they will attach to that cell, and they will release these enzymes and what are called perforins by exocytosis, and they will just create pores, basically almost like bullet holes. They'll just kind of start putting holes in the membrane, releasing enzymes, and the cell will undergo cell death. It will die, which is called apoptosis. Okay? And so this is what this looks like. So here's my cytotoxic T cell. Okay? It will find the target cell and bind to it. All right? It will then release these perforins, and which will poke little holes in the membrane. That will allow those granzymes to enter into the target cell and cause the target cell to undergo cell death, or apoptosis, and basically die. And so those are a form of adaptive, okay, cellular immunity. So adaptive defense, cellular immunity are your T cells. All right, and so the last thing we'll talk about with immunity, I'm just going to keep it in this video instead of making another one, are some of the things that we think of, homeostatic imbalances with immunity. And so the first one would be your immunodeficiencies, and these are things that you're either born with, congenital, or that you develop, that cause your immune cells and phagocytes to behave abnormally. Okay, and so there's various different types, but I want to focus on like autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases, well, let me go back. I know what I was going to say. I knew there was a reason I left a big blank here. So an immunodeficiency. One of the ones we've heard about is AIDS, okay, or HIV. So HIV is the virus, human immunodeficiency virus, and it causes the syndrome, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So what HIV does, it causes your own immune system to kind of fail. And so people with AIDS, their immune system starts to fail, and then what usually kills them are sometimes types of cancer or huge infections. They get lots of infections, and so that's basically what will kill them eventually, is kind of these systemic infections that they get because their own immune defense is no longer working. So I knew I was going to say something about immunodeficiencies, and that was going to be AIDS. So if you don't know much about AIDS, it's something that has shown up in my lifetime. So I remember when the AIDS epidemic kind of started in the 80s, and we've come a long way with treating that. So you guys probably take it for granted that there's been a treatment for AIDS all along, and that's not the case. It is a recent find. So it's an interesting thing. If you don't know much about it, I would suggest go dig around and read a little bit about HIV and AIDS. Autoimmune diseases. So this is when your own immune system loses the ability to recognize self and non-self. Okay, so it starts to see self as foreign. So you start to attack your own body. And you start to make your own what are called autoantibodies. And these autoantibodies cause the T cells to attack your own body tissues. All right, and so some examples of autoimmune diseases are MS, multiple sclerosis, myasthenia gravis, Graves' disease, which is a thyroid disorder, type 1 diabetes, lupus, glomerulonephritis, rheumatoid arthritis, vitiligo, I think that's right. No, vitiligo. And so all of those are examples of autoimmune diseases where your own body is turning against you and attacking your own tissues. Hypersensitivities, this is something when you mount a response to something that really should just be harmless, okay, so an otherwise harmless threat. And so some people have hypersensitivities to like bug bites and things like that. And you have an over inflammation, and you may get tissue damage. And it depends on there's different types of hypersensitivities, and it depends on how long they are, how quickly they occur, and how long they occur, and if it's the B cells or T cells involved. Okay, so there's different types of hypersensitivities, and so they can last anywhere from a couple of minutes to a couple of hours. Typically, if it's a kind of an immediate hypersensitivity, that's the antibodies, and if it's a kind of a delayed hypersensitivity, so maybe you ate something and several hours later you became sensitive to it, that would be possibly T cells. This acute one are when you're getting, like I said, bitten by something, and you just like bees. When I get stung by a bee, everybody else just gets a little bitty spot, and my hand just blows up. So I'm like hypersensitive to bee stings. And an anaphylactic shock. So if you tend to have hypersensitivities, then you really need to be aware of that. And so like I keep epinephrine or antihistamines with me. Usually just keep an antihistamine with me at all times in case I get bit by a bee or stung by a bee, because I know that I tend to be hypersensitive to them. And so I haven't had to ever use an EpiPen, so knock on wood. So anaphylactic shock is kind of an over hypersensitivity, and so it's a systemic response to that allergen. So typically when I get a bee sting, it's just on my hand, it blows up. But if it was anaphylaxis, my entire body would start to respond, not just a localized swelling of the hand. And one of the things that happens is those basophils and mast cells all throughout the body turn on. And remember, basophils and mast cells make histamine, okay? And if you get a systemic release of histamine, remember that local histamine, that causes that swelling and itching. But if you get a systemic release of histamine, it's going to cause your bronchioles, which carries air to your lungs, to constrict. It's going to make it hard to breathe. It's going to cause your vessels to vasodilate, and really it just causes your blood pressure to plummet. So it causes huge changes in blood pressure, big blood pressure loss, which we call hypotension, and which can result in shock and death. And so if someone has hypersensitivities, usually these people keep an EpiPen, at least a Benadryl, but maybe an EpiPen with them, because epinephrine will cause vasoconstriction and increase blood pressure. If you think back to your first anatomy, you talked about parasympathetic versus a parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And sympathetic was your adrenaline, your epinephrine. Think about what adrenaline and epinephrine do. It increases your blood pressure, so it kind of keeps your blood pressure back up. So that's kind of the first thing you can do quickly if someone's going into anaphylactic shock. And so we hear this with people now. Peanut allergies can cause that, bee stings, things like that. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it for today. And so I will see you in the next video. Thank you.